Okay, we are now live.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So thank you all for attending this virtual meeting of My Economy, Transport and Environment Decision Day. The meeting is being webcast on YouTube via the County Council website. We'll just run down the agenda. Deputations, I've had no notifications of any deputations, but I'm just going to announce now that Councillor David Simpson has asked to speak on 3 or 4 items on the agenda. So I invite you to speak at the relevant time, David, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, also noting that Councillor John Bennison has sent his apologies as well. Okay, so we go straight on to the agenda, and we've got agenda item 1. That's the Transforming 21 Waste Saving Proposals. I'm not sure who's presenting. Is it Sam or James?
It'd be Sam, Chairman.
Sam. Okay, Sam, would you just like to present the paper and a run through, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, thank you very much. So this paper sets out the proposals for some of the waste management savings as part of our Transformation to 2021 programme. There are 4 recommendations that we're seeking approval for today. The first of these is that we stop paying recycling credits to the district councils for material which has been made, for which provision has been made under the waste disposal contract. That primarily relates to glass, but there are some small amounts of card and paper banks that remain in operation that would also be captured by that proposal. The second recommendation relates to the opening hours that we have at our disposal facilities, and seeking to recharge the districts for those opening hours. They seek to utilise the facilities outside of those that are already agreed as part of the Project Integra Memorandum of Understanding. That Memorandum of Understanding principally covers all of the bank holiday events, Christmas, Easter, to allow for catch-up. But there are a number of additional hours that districts often request on Saturdays and Sundays as a result of operational changes. Up till now, the County Council has funded these, but is unable to basis, and we're seeking to recharge those hours back to the districts. The third proposal relates to the removal of glass banks from the HWRC network. Currently, almost all of the HWRCs have a glass bottle bank on site. These take a minimal amount of glass. It's been reducing year on year, such they now take around 3,000 tonnes a year. And the cost of servicing those banks now significantly outweighs any value from the material. So it represents a significant cost. In addition, a number of the districts, over 50% now, offer a curbside glass recycling service, collection service, in addition to the banks that are also provided at local amenity points next to pubs, shops, supermarkets, those kind of and sort of village halls, etc. And therefore, we feel it's appropriate for this material to be removed from that situation. It's also almost certain that glass will feature as one of the materials which is required to be collected by local authorities under the new consistency agenda as part of the Environment Bill. And as such, those remaining local authorities that don't currently offer a glass collection service will be doing so in the not too distant future. And therefore, it would be sort of double provision if we were then to continue to provide at HWRCs. The final recommendation seeks approval to propose that we look to agree a new joint working agreement with the WCAs and our WDA partners, the unitary authorities, in relation to the arrangements that we have currently under the Project Integra Memorandum of Understanding. The MOU was written in 1997, and since then there's been significant change, both in terms of the legislative picture, but also the operational situation that we now operate in, and the financial landscape, and no longer reflects the operations and the picture we now face. And this recommendation seeks approval to propose that agreement is reviewed by the County Council, along with our partners from the WCAs and the unitary authorities, to seek to bring forward a new proposal that more sort of accurately reflects the current programme.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. I just point out the the WDA's waste disposal authorities, and I had a meeting with Project Integra catch-up yesterday, and I think universally all the districts and boroughs, the collection authorities have agreed that the agreement needs a refresh, and we do need to look at it, and the timing is very good from that point of view. So thank you for that. Councillor Simpson, David, you have a few points to raise.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rob. And thank you, Sam, for such a very full explanation of on the bottling banks and why we're doing that. May I ask, could you confirm that the recharge to the districts over the extra opening hours is about 30,000 over all 11 districts?
It's tricky to be 100% specific because it changes year on year, because it really depends on when they want those hours. But yes, if you take the average for the last 3 years, the total cost of the county council is around £30,000. In some years it can be a bit higher, and some years a bit lower. It really kind of depends on when they've requested those hours and how many hours, because sometimes they just request a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning. Other times they might request all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and it sort of varies. It's almost it does vary year on year. But yeah, 30,000 is about the average.
So it's not going to cost them that much, and indeed, if they rearrange their working practices, nothing. Is that correct?
Potentially, yes. If they were able to adjust their operations to suit that, then and arrange their catch-ups differently, then yes, potentially they could do that differently.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, David, thank you for that. There's only one point I would like to make, and it's on the papers, paragraph 20. And in terms of the impact that COVID has had on all the papers we're looking at today, actually. And just to note also that the issue that has caused for all of us in preparing papers, and in fact delivering schemes, and the challenging there, but we have met those challenges. But I notice on the paragraph 20 about we have delayed some of the proposals that were going to go forward, and that's further discussions with the districts and boroughs, and we need to Stuart, you might want to make comment on this, and the reasons why we have done that.
Chairman, I'm very happy to. Thank you. As you rightly say, there were three kind of broad proposals that we put forward for reforming the way the recycling finance worked, and two of those proposals in particular gave our district colleagues some concern, and they felt that there may be an impact on their kind of incentive to help recycle more, which obviously we're all trying to promote collectively in the system. So I think in recognition of that, the two of the proposals, the ones relating to retaining recycling income and charging for contamination, have basically been put on hold at this stage, pending further discussion with the district councils, to see if between the changes coming down from national government through the changes that they're making to the national system, plus local discussion, and working together with our district council friends and colleagues, we can come up with a way that all of the parties can save the equivalent amount of cash that we need to save to meet our T21 savings, but not necessarily be ideologically wedded to the proposals that we brought forward, which at the time, Chairman, you were, I think, at pains to point out, were brought forward simply because they were in our direct control, and other possibly more sort of positive ways of saving money by reducing the burden or the cost of municipal waste generally were outside our direct control, and therefore in order to guarantee that we could make savings, we had to have a sort of fallback position that related to things that we could control directly. But I think we've always been open to the idea that there may be other ways, more constructive ways of saving funding from the waste system overall, if we could sort of work with our district partners. And Chairman, if I may just add one other comment, really, it's just to say that the County Council is absolutely committed to recycling, and these proposals are all about trying to find ways in which we can extend the effectiveness and the reach of the recycling system across Hampshire, by trying to ensure that the County Council can live within its financial means, and we continue to work very closely with the district councils, including the proposals that Sam alluded to that are being worked through at the moment, which will help to the county council to play its part in effectively providing an infrastructure to support greater effective recycling, both by the district councils as collection authorities, but also to help facilitate residents to recycle a wider range of things in the future. And it's about making sure that we get the right infrastructure at a time of tremendous financial pressure on the county council. We've got to make sure that every pound we spend on infrastructure is effective and helps to deliver that outcome.
That's great, Stuart, and appreciate that. Also, thanks to Sam and the team, because it is an incredibly complex issue, this, when we're looking at new policies and directives coming out as well. And as all those, as you heard, the negotiations with the districts and boroughs. And I'm also very concerned, well, not concerned, but there needs to be understood when we're looking at recycling, also the overall impact to the environment. We've got to make sure there is a net gain. And it's very easy to think something's a good idea, but after consideration, we need to make sure, as I say, we get that overall gain when we look at the whole and the large picture. So thank you, Sam, for that, and appreciate that, and thank you, Stuart. So I don't think there's any further comments. So Katie, I'm happy to accept the recommendations as set out in the paper from 2 down to 5. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll now move on to agenda item 2. This is the project appraisal, the A32 Winch Lane, the Gosport Junction. Have we got Brandon to present this?
No, Chairman, I'm afraid you've got me to do most of these reports today,
okay,
including this one.
Oh, I know, thanks.
So very briefly, Chairman, this is some central government funding that's been provided for road safety improvements, having identified certain roads that kind of qualified at the national level, including the A32 in Hampshire. And so proposals have been brought forward by the safety team for investment in creating better amenities for right turning traffic at this particular junction in Gosport, which does have an accident record. It's central government funding over and above our normal road safety budget. It's a good scheme. I think it's locally supported. Chairman, the only thing I would add to the report is I have been made aware this morning of a concern about some local issue to do with the way the junction may be used, and we will take that fully into account and have a look at that before we actually finalise the absolute detailed design of the scheme, including the possibility of some additional traffic management measure that may be required in relation to the potential conflict of right turning traffic northbound conflicting with right turning traffic southbound in the extended filter lane. So I've been made aware of that, and I'm grateful to Councillor Simpson for drawing that to our attention, and we will look at that before we kind of finalise the details and get on with the scheme. I haven't had the opportunity to talk to the scheme designers between getting the information and this discussion.
That's great, Stuart. Thank you very much. And I'll say another significant scheme, another nearly 1.6 million scheme. Councillor Simpson, I'm not sure if that answered the second part. Did you have anything further to add?
That answers everything, and I think it emphasises, as we were saying earlier, the need for emails beforehand to let people know.
Absolutely, and that was very useful. So thank you for that as well. An opportunity to do that and officers to consider it beforehand is very useful and very productive. So thank you. So I don't think I have any further comments. So happy to accept the recommendations, Katie, as set out in the papers 2 down to 4, I think. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, agenda item 3. This is the concessionary travel scheme. Stuart, are you doing this one?
I am, Chairman, yes. Annually, this time of year, the County Council, along with all the other concessionary travel scheme providers, are required to seek approval ahead of publishing the concessionary travel scheme for the following year. That has to be approved formally by December each year. And therefore, this report is the sort of annual report by which we bring forward the proposal to seek your authority. It is proposed to retain the concessionary travel scheme on exactly the same basis as it was last year. The only variation that happened in year last year, Chairman, was a relaxation of the 9:30 start time. Yeah. For senior citizens passes, during the lockdown period when a number of the shops actually opened earlier and gave a sort of priority hours shopping. Once the lockdown began to be eased and people returned to work, those schemes were also suspended in the shops, and the 9:30 deadline was brought back in due to our effort to give priority to people using public transport to get to work. Obviously, Chairman, since then as well, the schools and colleges are now back, and another significant demand on public transport at that time in the morning. So it's not proposed to relax the 9:30 start on the scheme next year. But clearly, Chairman, should circumstances change as a result of rising COVID infection rates, and we find ourselves back in a similar circumstance to March, April of this year, then that's obviously something that could be considered to vary the scheming year at that point.
Thank you, Stuart, and that's great. It's interesting to see and welcome that we're able to be, as a county, flexible to be able to adjust to the circumstances at the time. But clearly, as you quite rightly say, bringing the schools back into that as another dimension as well, that could significantly affect it. But it's a sort of watch this space at the moment, isn't it, and see how that develops. But I think important that everybody realises that, you know, we have a policy, but it's flexible enough to adapt to the current situation. Yes, David, I don't think you have anything to add to this one. No.
No, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. Happy to accept the recommendations, Katie, as set out in the paper of 2 and 3. Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 4. Procurement approach for the highways transportation development, engineering and management services for summer 2022. Stuart.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. We, as you're aware, Chairman, we've for a number of years had an arrangement whereby we've had a contract with an external service provider to effectively top up and support our engineering consultancy and related services. Which support the design and preparation of development of schemes and various other planning, transport planning type functions. That contract is due to run out in 2022, so we're looking to start the procurement process for a replacement arrangement. And it's suggested, Chairman, that arrangement should be different this time, and we're recommending a multi-supplier framework arrangement. Yep. And that's at least in part, Chairman, to reflect the changing times and the changing financial profile that the authority finds itself in at the moment. We've done exceptionally well in terms of capital funding for the last few years, and whilst there's no immediate likelihood of that stopping, we nevertheless feel that we should go for a different type of top-up arrangement, which gives us a bit more flexibility, particularly in terms of whether or not we would want to look at different type of arrangements in the future, and bringing the sort of opportunity to make some radical changes, not only in this area but other contractual areas. The arrangement recommended today would basically keep open the option to possibly combine together some of the activities that we currently do through separate external service provider arrangements, and it also gives us the opportunity to look at a different type of arrangement should that be considered appropriate in the future, such as a joint venture type arrangement or some other different type of strategic partnering arrangement from the ones that we've had to date.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, I think this is a really significant paper, and it just shows you sometimes how opportunities arise. I think there are also a lot of alignments, a lot of the contracts. So if you like, and I'm pleased to hear you say it sort of gives us that flexibility over that period. In effect, it sort of gives us a transition period to look at what's happening, line up a lot of our contracts, look at a new way of working, and not tying us down to restrict us at what might, some of those opportunities that might arise later on from this. So really pleased to see this paper, and I don't usually say this, but I think it's quite exciting, looking at a new way of doing things and the opportunities that will come from that. David, do you have a comment? Don't think so.
There was nothing on this, just pleased that I like keeping options open as much as you and Stuart.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so thank you, Stuart, as I say, and well done to the officers for looking at this and putting this together. And as I say, look forward to see how this develops as we go forward. So Katie, happy to accept the recommendations as set out on 2 down to 6. Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 5. This is the Network Rail Millway Bridge at Andover.
That's right, Chairman. Yeah, this is a relatively straightforward proposal. Network Rail have proposals in place to do some work on the bridge at Andover that you referred to. Under the kind of prevailing legislative system, that bridge currently isn't capable of bearing a 40-ton weight. Network Rail are obliged to offer the local highway authority the opportunity to contribute to a bridge improvement or a bridge strengthening project that they might be running on the network to bring it up to 40-ton specification if that's appropriate, but the local highway authority have to pay for the difference, Chairman, in the costs of the work for basically replacing it as is or improving the weight limit. Having had a look at this scheme, it seemed entirely appropriate to my colleagues from the engineering team that we should take advantage of the opportunity to get this bridge made up to 40-ton weight limit. There don't seem to be any other significant considerations to the contrary, and therefore it's recommended that we should contribute the necessary funding to this Network Rail project to have the bridge brought up to the higher weight limit at the time that they carry out the improvements on a bridge that is Network Rail's rather than the highway authorities.
Yeah, okay, that's great. It's good to see this, and it's nice to see some joint partnership working with Network Rail. And really, this is really good value because the work's being done and able to get that limit lifted up to that 40-ton for that amount of money, I think is really good value. And like you say, it is taking an opportunity. So well done for the team for negotiating that as well. So I'm happy with the recommendations. I don't think Dave's got anything to say. So Katie, thank you to set the recommendations from 2 down to 4. Thank you. Okay, agenda item 6 in the pack is the project appraisal for the Town Mills Andover, Stuart.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is a project that I think you're familiar with, and it's certainly something that's very important to our friends and colleagues in Test Valley Borough Council, who have embarked on a very ambitious and I think very interesting regeneration programme for Andover Town Centre. One of the early opportunities is to try to remove some traffic from the town centre area by basically creating an alternative access to the Town Mills car park, and the County Council's been working with Test Valley on this project. Unfortunately, when the project went on site, which was before the lockdown came into place, we did encounter some problems on site, not least to do with some gas works that were required, a fairly major project, and that meant that the other work had to temporarily be suspended. When it was stood up again, it had to accommodate COVID safe working practices, Chairman, and therefore the overall cost of the scheme has gone up. It's still considered to represent very good value for money. It's a very important local project, and I think it'll be catalytic to the kind of ambitious plans that Test Valley Borough Council have for the town centre and the economic revival of Andover Town Centre. And therefore, given that there's additional external funding available to actually meet the additional costs, it's recommended that your approval is given for increasing the value of this project in the capital programme in accordance with the issues that I've outlined in terms of additional cost.
Thank you, Stuart. I'll make a few comments in a minute, but I believe Councillor Simpson. David, do you want to make a comment on this one?
Yeah, if I may, please. It was mainly, I've got no problem with the scheme. Great, go ahead. It was, first of all, as the report says, COVID was part of the delay. Do we get any money back from the government because of that? And secondly, Stuart has just mentioned, I didn't pick up on it for some reason, that the gasworks also delayed it. Now, was that down to them not being aware that gasworks were needed, or gas coming in late, or essentially, can we go to British Gas and get some money off them as well?
Stuart, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I'll try and deal with both the questions. We are accounting for all the additional costs that the County Council has incurred as a result of COVID. and we are making a return monthly to the MHCLG Cancer Symptom with the full details of those costs, and that does include capturing and separately accounting for things on capital programme projects such as this, where COVID has been a factor in increasing the costs. So whether we'll get full reimbursement, partial reimbursement, or nothing, I think is part of a bigger discussion that's going on with central government, but they are being made aware of the additional costs on a monthly basis, as all councils up and down the country are doing. In terms of Southern Gas, I think the complication was about the work that was needed to be done. It wasn't a surprise, but I think there were some issues there. And Councillor Simpson, I know you're aware of this, that this is not a completely unique problem that we do sometimes encounter utilities equipment that either isn't where we thought it was, or the utility companies are not able to move or alter or repair their equipment as quickly as we would like, which impacts on our project. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to secure any kind of significant financial redress for those kind of matters, but we do continue to work with the utility companies as closely as we can and to minimise any additional cost and seek their support and help to expedite any works that they need to carry out on their equipment in the middle of one of our schemes.
Thank you, Stuart. David, I hope that's answered. You raised two really interesting questions, and I raise them quite regularly with Stuart. We do have a COVID code on the accounts, and I make sure whenever we need to that we do recognise if there's been additional costs. So I can assure you we do that. And in terms of utilities, yes, Stuart's quite right. This does happen on a regular basis, and where we can, I can assure you we actually will take them to task if it is the case. But it is still never ceases to amaze me how often we do come across services that aren't chart or mapped. Clearly, new technology helps with that process now, and clearly it informs it as we go forward. So things should improve on that. But it is still quite significant on some issues. We've had this up at Whiteley, actually, where we're working on the junction up there. There are some significant issues there with utilities that we're dealing with right now. So two very significant or important questions that you raised there, and hopefully that's answered them. Do you want to come back, David?
I just wonder if there's anything, maybe the white paper on planning, where we can put forward that all utilities must be accounted for before development, and possibly get an MP or two to put in that where this does happen, the county council should be reimbursed. And that would make the utilities start to look a little bit closer at what they've got.
I think the issue there is, in terms of putting the right infrastructure in on any new development, absolutely. Clearly the mapping is much easier now, but where it is genuinely not known, it's very difficult to do that retrospectively. But I mean, but if we're finding their services and mapping them, there's potentially a situation where that information is of value to them. Let's put it like that, I think. So exactly, yeah. So, yeah, okay. So point taken and understood, and it's conversations we are having, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Katie. So happy to accept the recommendations as set out are 2 and 3 on the paper. Thank you. Okay, agenda item 7. This is the Aldershot Station Transport Hub and Public Realm improvements. Stuart.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, again, I know this is a project that you're familiar with, Chairman, because we have talked about it before. Originally, the project was being developed by our colleagues in Rushmore Borough Council as part of their initial work, and the County Council was going to make a financial contribution to what was effectively a Rushmore project. However, further work on the project itself has indicated that it may now be more appropriate to be delivered and managed by the County Council, and therefore the proposal today is that the County Council would bring this project into our capital programme. There is LEP funding involved in it, and therefore, that's helpful. The County Council's contribution will go up because I think now we've done a kind of full cost assessment and probably been able to take into account a fuller range of factors. We've got a more robust costing for the proposal. It's still felt that this represents very good value for money, Chairman, and I know that you've had a number of discussions with Rushmore Borough Council colleagues recently, and they are developing a very ambitious programme of transport improvements for both Aldershot and Farnborough. And it's important to see that the station forecourt is part of a network of investments and developments which are taking place in the area which we're involved in, and again anticipating a question which Councillor Simpson was very kind enough to give me notice of beforehand, or Councillor Benison actually asked a question about this beforehand in the briefing. Sorry, David, but Councillor Simpson may also be interested in the answer. And that was to do with Rushmore bus station being relocated as well. And Rushmore Council have confirmed that they are working on a proposal to do that. That they would have moved Rushmore the bus station in Aldershot anyway, whether or not the forecourt project had gone ahead. They're working very closely with Stagecoach on that, and we're ensuring that appropriate provisions being made in all the transport projects that we're working on with Rushmore in that area to make sure that there's no disadvantage to bus passengers in the meantime. And they are currently working on a proposal, but there isn't yet a final proposal for accommodating that. But I felt it was important to draw your attention to that question that had been raised, and apologies to Councillor Simpson, it was actually Councillor Benison that raised that one.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stuart. Did you want to make a comment, David? No, you're okay. All right.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And it is interesting to see that we're now sort of delivering the scheme overall, I suppose, from the County Council's point of view. I think what it does do is demonstrate the importance of working together and the joint partnership working. And in fact, indeed, consulting with the County Council at a very early stage when we have the skills and expertise to deliver these sort of schemes. So thank you for that, Stuart. So I'm happy to accept the recommendations, Katie, as set out in the papers from 2 down to 7. Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 8. This is the on-street pay and display parking. Do we have Mark?
Yeah, Chairman, Mark's going to present this item. Give you a break from me.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. The main focus of this report is to agree the way forward with regard to on-street chargeable parking, otherwise known as pay and display parking. Parking services across the UK have been severely impacted by the pandemic, especially in retail areas, and therefore the report outlines the financial implications related to the lost revenue from both existing and proposed chargeable parking schemes in relation to the County Council's aim of delivering the parking service on a full cost recovery basis. Parking occupancy surveys that we've undertaken have shown that many people regularly overstay the current time-limited restrictions in place in many of the county's towns and larger villages. This often results in people being unable to find a convenient place to park on street, and pay and display parking is far easier to enforce and therefore results in far better compliance with the time restrictions, which in turn provides increased turnover of parking spaces, which, you know, certainly in towns and the larger villages is really quite critical. However, given the possible needs for the COVID-19 response or recovery, coupled with the many town centre pop-up schemes that we've got currently in place at a range of locations across Hampshire, which have often temporarily removed parking to help promote social distancing, it's recommended that we defer further work to progress chargeable parking in high street type locations until early in the summer of next year. In terms of parking demand, the pandemic has resulted in a big increase in visitor numbers throughout the summer, particularly at our kind of established tourist areas. Seafront locations were especially busy, and also parts of the New Forest, particularly, you know, really inundated with people. This caused particular significant problems actually with unsafe or inconsiderate parking, with many local people reporting issues and make a request for new parking controls to be put in place to help manage this problem. The report therefore seeks approval to be able to proceed with new areas of chargeable parking in areas outside of the kind of high street locations, including those visitor hotspots such as suitable seafront locations. The report goes on to provide a brief update on the new on-street parking service, including the contract with NSL, our parking enforcement provider, together with an overview of the achievements of our newly formed parking services team, and that includes things like rolling out a new digital permit system. The report also seeks approval to serve notice on the remaining district agency agreements for parking enforcement and for traffic in the event that those districts are deemed to be delivering the on-street parking services or the traffic functions outside of the terms stipulated within the new district and traffic parking agreements. Finally, the report seeks to confirm that domiciliary care workers carrying out work commissioned by the County Council will be exempt from charges for parking in residential parking zones when they're going about the kind of course of their duties.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much. And another one of these reports and schemes we're introducing that has been affected by COVID in the changing circumstances of how people shop, how they travel, whether it's through literally transport or cycling or walking as well. Councillor Simpson, you had a comment to make on this paper.
Yeah, if I may, Rob, the first thing was, if we're moving it out of the high streets, if we're not doing it in the high streets because it will have an adverse effect, why are we doing it at all? Because we'll still have an adverse effect next summer. And I appreciate this is a long-standing thing that we've been looking at for some period. The other thing is, I was listening to you, Mark, and you mentioned that people are regularly use it earlier rather than later, so that
David,
we've got.
Sorry to interrupt. You froze for a minute there. Could you just go back a sort of paragraph?
Okay. So what I said was is that as people regularly overstay,
yeah,
should we not be therefore keeping them, bringing it in earlier in order to get a higher footfall in the high street? It seems counterintuitive to what you're trying to achieve, whereas at the same time, if it's an adverse effect on the high street, why should we bring it in the first place? They seem contradictory questions, but I think you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
And the other one, which I've just brought up, thanks again to Mark, domiciliary workers, how will we determine who qualifies as one? Or do we have a list?
David, thank you for that. Mark, would you like to address those points Cass Simpson has raised? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Just I suppose kind of taking the last one first about the domiciliary care workers. We're working with our colleagues on in kind of adult services to be able to kind of identify those people who would qualify. We obviously have to be very careful because there are a whole host of potential medical professionals. If we're not careful, we could end up issuing thousands and thousands of permits free of charge at a cost to the county council. So I think it's really those kind of frontline care workers who would qualify, and we'll have to look at kind of other mechanisms maybe for kind of arrangements for those other kind of medical related professionals. I suppose with regard to the on-street pane display, I think definitely overall pane display chargeable parking has huge benefits, I think, for town centre locations, and it is kind of common that there is concern raised by kind of business owners when chargeable parking is kind of first considered. But it has shown elsewhere that it does significantly improve the compliance with the restrictions. That the surveys that we've undertaken in some of the kind of pilot schemes that we were looking at showed that we actually had in the region of 130 vehicles per day overstaying the 1 hour restriction in one particular location. So we know that there's a particular problem there that we need to address, and obviously that there is a kind of knock-on effect that we have to operate the service on a full cost recovery basis. So implementing or continuing with the existing limited weighting arrangements, these are very kind of costly and time-consuming to enforce, and it's the reason why lots of people manage to kind of overstay, because they just don't get picked up by the civil enforcement officers, because they simply can't cover all of that in one go. I suppose your point there about why don't we introduce the kind of measures at the moment if they are beneficial. I think the general view is that there's been a lot of change on the high street, and some businesses have been struggling, and some have even closed down. And I think with the pop-up schemes that are in place at the moment that have actually taken out a lot of the on-street parking as well, it would make introducing on-street chargeable parking at this time, I think, probably the wrong time to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I know Stuart wants to comment. Stuart, would like to comment?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, I just wanted to really reinforce the points Mark's made, particularly about the impact of the COVID restrictions, the fragility of business confidence, and the fact that there are a number of pop-up schemes. And as Councillor Simpson heard this morning, we're waiting for a government decision on another £3.5 million worth of emergency active travel fund money, some of which again will go towards doing more pop-up schemes in town centre areas. So I think that's primarily the reason behind the suggestion, and the reason we're talking about putting it off till next summer is to try to hopefully by that stage we'll be getting back to a kind of post-COVID situation where we can introduce the parking controls. But obviously, if circumstances differ, I dare say we'll have to review the position again. With regard to the domiciliary care workers, I just wanted to make two very quick points, if I may. One is that the situation that you're being asked to confirm today, Councillor Humby, is a continuation of the system that the district councils operated in residential parking zones before. And secondly, there are provisions within residential parking zones for visitor kind of arrangements. So if it's more of an occasional visit, I think that can be accommodated in the normal way. The domiciliary care work that we're talking about being commissioned directly by the county council is probably someone visiting the same residence several times a day, and therefore it is a slightly different order of things than perhaps other types of less frequent visit that can be accommodated. But we will be working very closely with Adults Health and Care Service colleagues, as Mark described, to make sure that that scheme works effectively.
Thank you, Stuart. David, did you want to make a...
Well, that answered quite a lot, thanks. The only question remaining that after Stuart's comments is, if we're not enforcing now, how sure are we that we'll enforce afterwards? Presumably you've got statistics from where it's happened which show that enforcement possibly is self-enforcing.
Well, I'm sure Stuart will answer that, but quickly, the whole idea of this, David, is that it self-funds, so it actually funds the enforcement. Therefore, you can actually do it. Stuart, would you like to add quickly to that?
Absolutely, Councillor Humby. We don't want to see people having to pay parking penalty charges. We want to see the parking used in the most effective way, which respects the regime that's put in place. Okay. And I think really what Mark was saying is that experience shows that charged for parking is observed better than time-limited parking where there is no charge, and therefore where any income is entirely dependent on finding transgressors to pay for the cost of the service. Whereas if people are paying for parking, my ambition is that that will fund the service so that we're not dependent on serving penalty notices on people. And it's not a scheme that's incentivized to punish people. It's a scheme that's where it's incentivized to make sure the parking works properly. You get that turnover of parking spaces and therefore help the businesses by increasing the footfall.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think it's one of those things, David, where now is not the right time to reduce everything, as Mark has said, because of the change in circumstances we're all going through. But very often when you introduce schemes, they do take a while to bed in. And as you can sure I'm aware, I'm either everybody's best friend or I'm public enemy number one when it comes to parking. So there does need to be a bit of time to let things bed in. And it would be slightly strange, I think, to introduce some of them while we're in this current period of uncertainty. I think that's what the basis of the paper was trying to state. So hopefully you agree with that and accept that and understand. Yeah, thank you. So happy, Katie, to accept the recommendations as set out in the paper from 2 down to 6. Thank you, Katie. Okay, great. Agenda item 9. This is the Ipley Crossroads. Are you doing this, Stuart?
I am, Chairman, yes. Again, a scheme or a location that I know is known to you. This has been historically a difficult junction where we have tried a number of safety improvement schemes short of staggering the crossroads to try to reduce the accidents there, particular vulnerability for cycle users. Clearly, very concerning. And after the most recent sort of accident record investigation, we have taken the decision to recommend to you now that we should go ahead and stagger the crossroads at Ipley, which, because it's in the New Forest, is particularly complicated because of all the different additional legislative requirements that apply to doing works in the New Forest. And I'm very happy to commend this scheme to you now. I think it's important, timely, and we need to get on with it. We are in the process of negotiating the compensation land for the fact that additional land is taken up by road by altering the crossroads, and we therefore have to provide compensation land to be added to the New Forest open forest area. We're working through that at the moment. We I think have got quite an imaginative proposal to try and put additional land over and above the amount needed for the compensation for this junction into the equation, but we're seeking some kind of formal recognition that that will allow us to do further schemes in the future without needing to sort of provide additional compensation land. But if we can't resolve that, we'll just do it on the basis of the compensation needed for this scheme so that we can get on with it as quickly as possible, Chairman.
And that's really important, and I'm really pleased to see this scheme going ahead. I'd also like to thank the officers that have worked up this land bank arrangement. It is, as ever, always very difficult in the New Forest for obvious reasons, and dealing with Forestry England and Natural England as well, and getting to this agreement. I know we're not quite there yet, and if we have to do an individual one, we will. But this sets us up very well to have a template for going forward that we can do that, which should simplify a lot of these schemes that come forward, hopefully. So a big thanks to you, Stuart, and the team for being able to look at that and negotiate that type of agreement. I don't think you have anything to comment, David?
No, totally agreement,
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely, thank you. So, Katie, happy to accept the recommendations as set out in the papers from 2 down to 6. Okay, we just have one more agenda item 10. This is on outside bodies and organisations. This is the New Forest Business Partnership. Councillor Manns will no longer be on that as representative, and it will now be Councillor Alexis McAvoy. So we can note that, please, Katie. Okay. Okay, that brings us to the end of the agenda. I'd just like to thank everybody for attending, and for yourself, David, for your input, and the officers for reporting. I would just like to say to any other people that are watching that a lot of these papers go through a very rigorous scrutiny programme through the select committee. Not all of them, because some of them are straightforward and just papers that come up and just refreshed every year. But those were, and then there was a very good select committee this morning that Councillor Simpson was present, chaired by Russell Oppenheimer, and a good discussion, I thought, through there. And it's just to note that some of these papers, as I say, have been through a great deal of scrutiny before they come to this D-Day. So I'd like to bring the meeting to a close and formally ask that we stop the recording, and thank you all very much for attending. Thank you.